A man was digging a water cistern behind his compound in eastern Nigeria when his spade struck metal. What came out of the ground was a bronze vessel wrapped in a lattice of rope, except the rope was not rope. It had been cast, poured as liquid metal in one piece around a pot in a single go. The walls were thinner than a coin. Nothing about it belonged where it was found. Not because the people living on that soil could not make such a thing. They could. We now know precisely where they dug the copper, and it was not far away. It is what a thing like that costs you. It costs a workshop that consumes metal for years and produces no food. It costs men who spend their lives not farming. It costs somebody able to stand up and say this many hands for this long on an object nobody will eat, wear, or fight with. It costs an order that somebody has to obey. And the people who lived on that soil had nobody who could give one. No court, no capital, no throne, no standing army, no tax collector. They had a saying about it, and they have it still. Igbo-Ukwu is. The Igbo have no king. Somebody down in that soil had been buried wearing a crown. The digging that followed went 8 meters below the modern surface, and what it found was not a grave in any ordinary sense. It was a room. The walls were lined with wooden planks. The floor was matted. The whole box was pinned together with iron nails and iron staples buried whole underground. Inside it, a man was sitting up. He had not been laid down. He was seated on a wooden stool banded with 2 rings of bronze studs, upright, facing south, held in that position while the earth was closed over him. He was not alone. 5 other people were in the chamber with him. We do not know who they were, and we should be careful about what we assume. They may have been attendants, they may have been family. The chamber does not say, and the people who built it are not available to ask. What the chamber does say is that whoever closed it did not treat this as a burial of one person. It was built as a scene and arranged to be understood by anyone who ever opened it again. On his body, copper anklets, beaded armlets, a breastplate, and across his head a diadem worked with small openings along its upper edge, cut to hold eagle feathers upright. Beside him, a fly-whisk handle. A star. These are not decorations. Every one of them is an instrument of authority, the objects a person holds when other people are expected to look at them and stop talking. And around all of it, poured across the floor of the chamber and heaped against the man himself, were beads. Tens of thousands of them. So the first question is not how they made any of this. It is who he was allowed to be. Take one of the bronzes and put a light behind it. The wall thickness on the finest pieces runs between 1 and 2 millimeters. On a cast object, made without a furnace anyone has found, without a written procedure, without a single line of instruction surviving anywhere. The method was lost wax casting. You model the object in wax, you pack it in clay, you heat it until the wax runs out, and you pour metal into the space the wax has left behind. Then you break the mold because the mold can only ever be used once. Every single object is therefore the only one of itself. For a long time, the assumption in European archaeology was that this could not be local. The technique looked imported. The skill looked imported. Somebody, somewhere, must have brought it in. So the metal was tested. Lead isotopes work as a fingerprint. Ore from different deposits carries measurably different ratios, and those ratios survive smelting, so you can hold a finished object against a hole in the ground and ask whether they match. The copper matched deposits near Akiri, in what is now Benue Estate. The lead matched the lead-zinc ores at Enyigba-Abakaliki, in what is now Ebony State. The tin came from regional alluvial sources, not Europe, not the Mediterranean. Every metal in the crown came out of the ground within reach of the people wearing it, and the hands that worked it were theirs. That answer closed one question and opened a worse one, because the metal is local and the beads are not. The excavation recovered somewhere around 165,000 beads of glass, carnelian and stone, more than 150,000 of them glass alone. Not a handful, not a trade sample, a number that reads like a national reserve. The glass was tested too. Most of it is plant ash soda lime glass, and most of that was manufactured in Mesopotamia. Some came from Egypt, some possibly from the Levant. The lead used to color and opacify certain beads carries a signature matching Tunisian ore, and some of it resembles Indian ore. Mesopotamia, Egypt, Tunisia, possibly India. Set that against the map. The route runs north across the Sahara to Gao, on the bend of the Niger, and from Gao onward into North Africa and the wider world. Which means this: a settlement with no king, no capital, and no writing was holding one end of a trade route that reached the other side of a desert and did not stop there. Somebody was buying. At that volume, somebody was buying constantly and paying with something. We do not know what. There are candidates. Ivory is the obvious one, and ivory was in fact recovered from the site. The northern trade also ran on kola, on cloth, on captives. But none of that is written anywhere, and the site itself does not hand you a ledger. A desert crossing is not a casual errand. It is weeks of organized movement, water, animals, guides, and risk, repeated often enough that 150,000 glass beads end up in one place in the forest. Somebody sustained that for long enough to fill a chamber. That is not a gap in the story. That is the story. None of this was accepted quietly. When the radiocarbon dates came back, 4 of them landed in the 9th century AD. That put a cast bronze tradition in southeastern Nigeria centuries before the Benin bronzes and centuries before contact with Europe. The response from parts of the field was that the dates must be wrong. An alternative was proposed that the material was really 15th century and that the whole thing had been misdated by 600 years. It matters that we say plainly how that was resolved, because it was not resolved by insistence. It was resolved by more dating. Accelerated dating of a textile fragment from the shrine deposit returned an 11th to 12th century result. A later program on charcoal and wood from the same site returned 10th to 13th century. The early chronology held. It is now the accepted one. Some questions genuinely remain open. The relationship between the 3 excavated sites is still argued over. So is the identity of the man on the stool, whether he was an Eze Enri, a sacred priest king, of whom there were only ever a few, or a senior holder of the Ozo title, of whom there were always many. That argument is live, and this film is not going to pretend it is settled. But the date is settled. The bronzes are as old as the dates say. They were cast where they were found, and nobody brought the skill in. There is a second account of where the Igbo came from, and it is not a fringe one. It is held seriously by a great many Igbo people, and it deserves to be put at its strongest rather than waved past. It goes like this. Eri was a son of Gad, and Gad was a son of Jacob. After the northern tribes of Israel were scattered, Eri led his people across a river, the Sambation, which some identify with the White Nile, into the Benue Valley, then west to the Niger, and there founded NRI. The same NRI whose priest kings are the best candidate for the man in the crown. The evidence offered for it is not nothing. Igbo tradition circumcises male infants on the 8th day. It observes food prohibitions. It mourns the dead for 7 days, marks the new moon, and marries beneath a canopy. Researchers, including Daniel Liss at the University of Basel, have documented a real and continuous Jewish self-identification among Igbo communities. Now weigh it honestly. The customs are real. What is disputed is whether they are uniquely Israelite, and the mainstream reading is that they are not. That 8th day circumcision, Food, taboos, and patrilineal inheritance recur widely across sub-Saharan Africa without requiring a migration from the Levant to explain them. The genetics point the same way. Igbo paternal lineages sit inside the sub-Saharan African tree. The Middle Eastern signature that turns up in Jewish populations elsewhere does not turn up here. One attempt to test it directly went badly. An American missionary organization collected saliva from around 124 Igbo men and reported a negative result, and the reaction was fierce that the sampling was narrow, the framing was loaded, and that a foreign group had appointed itself judge of who somebody's ancestors were. That criticism has force. A test designed by outsiders to confirm outsiders' categories is a weak instrument. So, here is the honest position. The DNA does not support descent from Israel. The DNA also cannot tell you when an oral tradition began or why it took root or what it has meant to the people carrying it, and those are real historical questions that genetics does not get to close. What the DNA can do is tell you something the tradition does not, and it turns out to be stranger. Look at the Y chromosome, the piece passed father to son, unmixed, down the male line. Among Igbo men, one lineage accounts for more than 90% of it. Geneticists call it EM2. 90% is not normal. In most populations on Earth, the paternal line is a patchwork. Here it is close to a single thread. EM2 is the dominant male lineage across Western Central Africa, and West Africa is where the defining mutation is thought to have arisen. Its common ancestor traces back roughly 16,000 years. So the Igbo paternal line is not an arrival. It is not a branch of something from elsewhere that settled in. It is one of the region's own deep lineages in the region it started in, which quietly disposes of the idea that a people this accomplished must have come from somewhere else. They were already there. They had been there since before agriculture. And that raises the question the whole film has been circling. If they were there that long, and there were that many of them, why was there never a state to answer it? Put the male line next to the female line and compare them. The maternal line is read from mitochondrial DNA, inherited only from your mother. Take the three largest peoples of Nigeria, Hausa, Yoruba, and Igbo, and read both lines across all three. The mitochondrial picture is shared. The three groups sit on a broadly common maternal substrate. The Y chromosome does not. Paternally, the groups separate. Measure how different the populations are on each line and you get a result that is the wrong way round from what most people would guess. The differentiation between these populations is higher on the Y chromosome than it is on mitochondrial DNA. Read that sentence carefully because it is the finding. Higher paternal differentiation means the men did not move. Lower maternal differentiation means the women did. Generation after generation, across the whole region, sons stayed in the settlement their fathers were born in, and daughters married out and moved between communities. The genome is describing a rule of residence. Not a migration, not a conquest, a rule about where you live when you marry, running for so long and so consistently that it is still legible in the DNA of living people. Think about what that does to a map over centuries. The men of a settlement are, generation after generation, the sons of the men who were there before them. The line stays put and hardens into something you can identify. Meanwhile, the women arrive from the surrounding communities and leave for them, and the maternal inheritance is continually stirred across the whole region until the differences between groups wash out of it. Two lines running through the same families, recording opposite things. One recording who stayed, the other recording who moved, and a society organized that way does not need a king. It is not missing one. Here is what stateless has been made to mean and what it actually meant. Authority was there. It was simply distributed, and it was not inherited as command. Decisions were taken in the town assembly where adult men attended and spoke. Standing was earned through title societies, the Ozo among them, which cost the taker real wealth and returned real status. Lineage elders held weight. Age grades held weight. Oracles and shrines held weight, and a shrine could reach across many settlements without owning any of them. There were exceptions, and they should be named. Onitsha had its Obi, Arachukwu had its Eze Aro, and Nri had the Eze Nri. But look at what an Eze Nri actually was. He was a ritual figure. He cleansed abominations, sanctioned the calendar, conferred titles. His reach was enormous, and his coercion was nil. He commanded no army and levied no tax. Communities across a wide territory accepted his authority precisely because he could not compel them. Now go back into the burial chamber. A man seated upright in a crown with eagle feathers holding a fly-whisk, surrounded by more glass than anyone in the region had ever seen, and no fortress, no palace, no treasury, no army to go with any of it. That is not a king whose kingdom we have failed to find. That is what the top of an Igbo society looked like. The wealth is real and the authority is real. Neither one is the state, because there was not going to be a state. The order that built the bronzes was never given. It was agreed. There is a habit of reading African history by looking for the empire and then recording its absence as a lack. The people at Igbo-Ukwu wrote nothing down. They left no monumental capital, no king list, no ruins of a court, because none of those things ever existed to leave. What they left instead was a room 8 meters underground with a man sitting upright in it, wearing metal from 3 Nigerian deposits and glass from 4 foreign ones, cast to a wall a millimetre thick by a method that destroys its own mould every time it is used. And they left something else which is still being read. Nigeria today holds more than 250 ethno-linguistic groups. When researchers sequenced hundreds of whole genomes across 47 of them, they recovered tens of millions of genetic variants and found that the groups are genuinely differentiated from one another, distinctions that had been invisible because so much of human genetics had been built without African populations in it at all. Those distinctions are the villages. That is what they are made of. A people who never built a capital built something else and did it so consistently for so long that you can still measure it not in a monument but in the difference between what men inherited and what women carried. They were never a kingdom that failed to appear. They were a different answer to the same question, and it is still written in them.